comes to choosing the right length feeder rod for the terrain that you're faced with, it's so important. So let's take today as a perfect example of that. We're on a big open water reservoir just on the outskirts of Sheffield, Underbank Res, and hopefully we're going to have a great day catching skimmers on a conventional feeder. Now the distance that I've chose is 35 metres. Now most of you would think actually 35 metres, an 11-foot rod will be fine for that, but you've got to think about the elements that you've got to be faced with. Now for a start, it's quite a deep reservoir this, so I've got a few elements to contend with. I've got a really sharp shelf as it drops off into that deeper water, therefore I need that longer rod to lift my feeder and hopefully a fish on the end up to stop my feeder snagging up. So I've chosen a 12-foot rod, the Aero Pro 12 foot. And of course, because we're on a reservoir open to the elements, the wind could really pick up. I want to ensure that even at that distance, that I can get to that distance. And especially with this setup that I'm using, a conventional feeder setup, there's more drag in the cast, and therefore you need that longer rod to aid that precision and that accuracy, but more importantly that efficiency, knowing that you're building your peg up really accurately, and that's where that longer rod does come into play. Yet on the same time, if I'm still on this reservoir and I chose a distance of 60-70 metres, yes, I'd reach that spot of 12 foot if the wind was all right, but if the wind did pick up, I'd want to make my fishing more efficient, easier, and that's where a 13 foot would come into play for many reasons. So it'd be more or less the same setup regarding a conventional feeder setup, not a maggot feed. I've only just put that on just to stop the line tangling. But a 13-foot rod, of course, is slightly longer. It means I don't have to push the feeder through the air as hard because the rod is doing all the work. But as well as that, what you find is with a longer rod, when you're using softer baits, let's say I could be fishing redworms on the hook today. If I'm fishing at that distance, if I'm not having to force that feeder through the air because of a conventional feeder setup with a drag in that you've got to take into consideration, that if I'm not forcing the feeder through the air, there's less stress on the hook bait. Soft hook baits such as redworms can quite easily come off if I try to reach that distance with a 12 foot, but with a 13 foot, they're not going to come off. So in turn, thinking like that actually means you're fishing more efficiently, you're using the right hook bait to select the better fish in your peg. So it's really important, whether you're on a reservoir or a river, to actually go for a longer rod to make the job easier and more efficient. Yet at the same time, you could be on a commercial. Now, it's quite the opposite in a way on a commercial, that I actually want to use a shorter rod wherever possible for quite a few reasons. So let's say, for example, I'm chucking a method feeder or a bomb. I've got an inline bomb set up here. I could be chucking this 35-40 metres. I could be fishing a method feeder or a bomb against the far bank. A shorter rod's got quite a few advantages, especially with carp and F1s, because when it comes to actually bringing the fish back, because of the length of the rod, the fish naturally comes up nearer the angler. Therefore, you're in more control, and because it's a softer, lighter rod, you have more of a feeling of what's going on underneath that water. And of course, because of the action, there's less chance of actually getting those hook pulls when they fight really hard under your feet just before you net them. Now, I'd say for a 10-foot rod is great up to, let's say, 40-45 metres. And of course, when you're talking about a method feed, it's so aerodynamic. This is why you can get away with a shorter rod with a setup as a method feeder, as opposed to, let's say, a conventional feeder like what I've been talking about where we are today. But then there comes a time where if the wind does pick up, you need to make your fishing efficient. Always think about that, make the job easier. So if that was the case, it would be a simple case of, if I'm straining to hit my clip, be accurate, build my peg up, just swap to a longer rod to make everything easy. And that's where the 11-foot would then come into play. And also it allows you as the angler, especially on larger open expanses of water, especially on, let's say, commercials where you might be having to chuck 50-60 metres, that's where the 11-foot gives you that versatility in distance. So really do think about the distance that you're fishing and the length of the rod that you need especially on natural waters, to make it so much easier and efficient, and hopefully that'll help you get loads more bites and catch loads more fish.